This was right around when I was entering 8th grade. I remember all the events vividly like it happened yesterday. This house we had was amazing. It was a huge one-story house. The backyard was massive, bordering a riverbed. There was a huge metal shed in the back that looked like it was used to work on for semi-trucks. It was a 4-bedroom house. Although my brother's room was technically a den, it was converted to a room. It had long corridors to get to the other parts of the house as well. The kitchen was long, like a hall lined with counters. To get to the 3 bedrooms on the other side of the house, we had to pass the living room and then walk down the long hallway that was L-shaped. My mother's room was at the end of the long hallway, which is where most of the worst events happened. I only know my other siblings' or parents' encounters because they told me these as an adult, where before they didn't want to scare me because I also had my own experiences. It started with small things like uneasy feelings, weird smells like baby powder, misplaced objects, knocking on doors early in the mornings. But the first major incident was when my uncle lived with us. We were sitting in the living room and we had one of those old school big screen TVs. You know, the ones that basically took up the whole corner of the room. There was my uncle's phone on top charging. Keep in mind, this is a flat surface as my mom had decorations on top of the TV. We were watching TV when, suddenly, we all watched the phone light up at the corner of the room. It was super bright with just a screen. Before my uncle could move to check it, it flew off the TV. I don't mean like it slid. It legit flew. We all got startled. My mom came running from the kitchen, and my uncle, which was about in his 30s at the time, explains exactly what happened. In shock, he said, "No one touched it. It lit up bright, then freaking flew off the TV." We all kind of brushed it off, but it was nonetheless the first event of many. The next event kind of jumps from harmless to major. My brother was in the kitchen washing his plate from breakfast. Suddenly, he explains feeling a dreadfully feeling, but he said he just ignored it. As he was standing there, he just said it felt like a gush of wind had passed behind him. He even said he felt a tug on his shirt. Thinking it was one of our many siblings, he spun around to see who was there, but there was no one. He was alone. Kind of freaked out, he told my mom what happened. Since she is the most spiritual out of all of us, she is a big Christian. Stay with me because we are kind of jumping around in the timeliness based on harmless encounters to the worst ones. I remember getting ready for school one morning, and I began to feel the anxiety and dreadful feeling. I began to scan my room as I tied my shoes on the chair facing the doorway. I caught a glimpse of all black hand wrapped around the doorframe of my room. I jumped back, and I saw an all-black face peer from the corner of my doorframe. Its face was pasty black. Its eyes were all black, and it was wearing an old feather hat. I jumped up and screamed, and it quickly disappeared from the doorway. My mom came running in, and I explained with tears in my eyes what about I had just seen, and she didn't play it off, and she started to actually pray with me. This is my last experience in this house, although my other siblings continued to have things happen. It was my bedtime, and I shared a room with my older brother. I didn't like sleeping alone after seeing whatever that thing was that was watching me tie my shoes. My brother had a late bedtime because he was in high school. I would go to bed first alone. I remember being scared but falling asleep. I awoke to a silent, dark room. I couldn't move. I looked around the room from my top bunk bed. We had these huge glass mirrors for closet doors. In the reflection, I watched a creature crawl out from under the bed and hop up onto the bed bunk where my brother was sleeping. It was staring at me, and it had piercing red eyes. The only way I could explain it is it looked like an evil monkey. I began to scream and cry because I couldn't move. My brother began to wake up. This thing hops off my brother's bed and quickly goes under the bed. My brother jumps up and turns on the lights. I explained what happened as I could move and talk now. He went to get my mom, and I remember being terrified that he left me alone in my room to get my mom. She came in and we prayed, and then I went to bed. These next events are all from my siblings. My sister often had vivid dreams of a body hanging from the window in the restroom, even to the point where she had a dream of my oldest brother hanging there. There was something about that wall in the restroom in the window. Everyone felt uneasy about it, even before my sister ever mentioned the dreams about it. I remember being woken up by my brother. He explained that he was in the restroom. As he sat there, he said he became fixated on the wall and window. He began to feel panic and fear. He said the lights flickered and he caught a glimpse of a noose hanging from the window frame. He freaked out and quickly finished and ran out of the restroom. Now, I have never seen fear in any of my brother's eyes. That night was different. He asked me to stay awake with him that night. I agreed and we talked all night till the sun came up and there was light in the room. We both fell asleep once enough light was in the room from outside. Now this is from the perspective of my older sister. My sister would often hear children playing in the hallway from her room, or inside her room. The sounds changed from just laughing and small voices to the children calling out her name. She would explain when she took a shower she would hear them outside the door calling. When she would be in her room, she would hear them calling from down the hallway. She always freaked out and still to this day says she hated that house. This is from the perspective of my older brother. He was asleep when suddenly he was awoken by a loud noise. He explained he tried to move but he couldn't. The bed began to shake violently. The walls were cracking and shaking. He thought there was an earthquake, yet he couldn't move. As he lay there helpless, he said it was almost like a train was running through the room. Everything was shaking. There were sounds of a train running over tracks. He said he closed his eyes and started to pray. When he opened them, the room was back to normal. No cracks and no shaking or noise. The same brother would have had the same experience multiple times, except every time was different. Sometimes he would hear trains, people talking like a busy train station, and other times he would hear children screaming and crying. To this day, he has no explanation for this. This is half my perspective and half my sister-in-law's. For perspective, we had a dining room which had a door to the front of the house. It was connected to the long kitchen, and the doorway to my brother's room was on the right. We also had a computer in the corner. I remember watching a movie in my brother's room, which was the den converted into a room. We all fell asleep on the floor. I remember being awoken up by a loud sound. I hear my sister-in-law saying, "What the heck was that?" I rolled over and said, "I hear it too." Everyone around us was asleep. It sounded like someone was on the computer, typing on the keyboard, with the occasional clicking of the mouse. She said, "Go check." I was way too afraid to, due to the past events I had had. I reluctantly checked to see nothing. The computer was off. We both were freaked out, but after a while went back to sleep. This is the beginning of my siblings and parents seeing things. One of my brothers were walking through the hallway and explained seeing a figure of a man standing in the doorway of my mom's room at the end of the hall. He said it looked at him and reached for the doorknob and walked outside to the patio. This is one of the scariest things to happen next. My uncle was living with us still at the time. I remember walking in the door with my parents. He immediately stops us and says, "You guys have demons in this house. There's something seriously wrong." I remember the despair of my parents, especially on their face, knowing exactly what he meant. He explains coming home to an empty house, no one was home. He walked into the doorway and looked down the hall. He explained seeing two children run from the corner of the L-shaped hall and into my sister's room, the one that always heard the children calling her and playing in the hallway. He was surprised because his logical explanation was that my mom left some of us to do something. He walked into my sister's room to ask what we were doing home alone. He didn't find anyone in the room. He said he checked everywhere, and there was no children. Just then, he heard laughing in the hallway. When he looked out of the hallway, he saw the same small children run from the bathroom into my room. He was now confused because he said no one passed him to go back out of my sister's room. He said he was upset and called out our names and for us to come out of hiding and stop playing. He searched the whole house and found no one. He was home alone. I remember sitting there scared because the last room they entered was mine. Now this is my mother's story. She explained that my oldest brother who worked nights would sneak into her room in the early morning and sit on the bed to let him know he was home, and they would get up and drink coffee and just talk. She explained being woken up by the sound of her door opening. She said she had a feeling it was not my brother. Instead of my brother coming straight to the bed, she heard her cupboards open up and someone rummaging through them. Then they closed and she heard footsteps heading towards her bed. Then she felt someone sit on the bed. She turned around to say hi to my brother, but no one was there. She explained there was an impression on the bed as if someone was sitting there. My mother, being the God-fearing woman, said she laughed and began to pray. That's when she said the impressions disappeared and she heard footsteps leave the room. Now this is the same brother who had something pull on his shirt in the kitchen. It's the same thing. He was washing his dish, except we were all in the kitchen cleaning up from breakfast. Suddenly he said he felt the gush of wind again and something pull him harder. And he turned around to see and remembers getting off the floor with everyone around him. From my perspective, he blacked out. He collapsed onto the floor with no warning. We had the paramedics come, but he was fine. No one could explain what happened. This house was something evil. We always knew something was wrong, but we finally had the answers. We were all in the living room watching TV one morning when I remember my mom opening the front door. She moved her attention to some random guy standing in the front yard. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to scare you. I used to live here when I was a kid." My mom said, "Oh, you did?" He said, "Yeah, like 20 years ago." My mom said, "Can I ask you some questions?" And he said, "What do you want to know?" "But before you ask, yes, this house is haunted or cursed." He said that with a scared look. My mom, shocked, asked him to explain. He began to explain all the experiences we have been having. My mom, shocked, says, "What about the knocking or the baby powder?" He says, "Oh, that was my mom. She had a heart attack in the back restroom. Don't worry though. She would knock on our doors in the morning to let us know she was still around, since she did that when she was alive. She would wear a lot of baby powder for some reason, like it would fluff off her when she sat down," which this explained the knocking early in the mornings and the powder smell throughout the house. He said, "You have to be careful for the Native American chief." At this point, we all said, "What?" He pulled out his phone and pulls up a picture. It's a picture of a developed photo. It shows people on the patio at a party. They're standing in front of the bar we have in the backyard. And behind them is a huge figure with a chief hat on his head, feathers and all. Except his face is black and so are his eyes. Explaining what I seen when the figure was watching me tie my shoes. The man then explained that there are several ghosts and demons in the house. He even explained that they had a theory that someone hung themselves in the restroom. Now, this would also explain the dreams my sister would have and my brother seeing the rope. We thanked him and he rode his bike away. We never saw that guy ever again. And he was riding a bike. He couldn't have lived too far, but we never saw him again. After a few years, we moved out of this house. I was happy as could be because all the experiences ended once we moved. I remember being in high school and my friend was talking about how he just moved across the street. He explained the house and it was the same one. I warned him and he laughed and said nothing has happened yet. A few weeks later, he came up to me and he said, "Okay, I believe you. I was in the fridge getting milk this morning. No one was home, just me. And someone came super close to my ear. I could feel their breath on my neck and something said in a deep low voice, 'What are you doing here?' Throughout the school year, he would tell me all the things that happened, which in turn were way worse than what we experienced. I believe my mom would protect us with her praying. Thanks for reading. I have a lot more experiences now being older. I am much more alert to things that happened and are gifted to see and hear them. Let me know what you guys want to know about in the comments." My old high school buds, Tom and Derek, had rented a house near the University of Maryland in College Park. They would both ride their bikes to class and make art and jam on various instruments in their spare time. They had a jam room with guitar, bass, drums, and synthesizers. I would stay at their place and we would just chill and try to record something decent in the studio. I had this little tape recorder I bought from Radio Shack. I brought it over thinking we could record some of our jams and maybe even some paranormal activity. My friend Tom told me how weird stuff had been happening in the house. For example, they would see smoke just appear and disappear from seemingly nowhere. As with most college attendees, they would occasionally partake in the devil's lettuce. The smoky apparition didn't seem like the craziest thing to happen. So we decided to try out the recorder for spirit hunting. I did the classic, "Who is living here? Can you tell us your name?" But nothing came out in the recording other than myself. One night, me and Tom were jamming at the house by ourselves. Tom tells me he needs to go pick up his girlfriend in Virginia, about an hour away. So he leaves out the front door while I stay alone, just playing the guitar. I hear Tom outside on the phone the whole time I'm playing. 15 minutes goes by and I still hear him talking outside. I go to the door to see why he hasn't left yet. As soon as I open the front door, I stop hearing Tom on the phone. I see that his car is gone also. I go to close the door and turn around to see white smoke appear right in front of me. It quickly disappeared into the air. Thinking how strange that all was, I decided it was probably all in my head. Maybe I was just hearing things. I keep playing guitar until my other buddy, Derek, shows up. I tell Derek about what happened, and he did not seem too fazed. Him and Tom both have seen their fair share of weird stuff. They seem to be sort of a magnet to the paranormal. Derek gets on bass, and I play my guitar. We're jamming for a good 10 minutes when I hear a voice. "Stop," it said. I think how weird that is, and how it sounds just like my buddy Tom. Then I hear it louder. "Stop!" It was Tom. I knew it was him because he had a very distinct nasally voice, but he couldn't have been him. He was still an hour away in Virginia. Derek and I both stopped playing. I asked him if he heard that. He said, "Yeah." I asked him, "What did you hear?" He says, "It sounded like Tom saying stop." Tom eventually comes home and we talk about what happened. We are all pretty weirded out about the whole thing. It didn't keep us from having a good time and recording some good music. I think the fear and mystery might have added a bit of flavor into our own productions as well. Tom and Derek continued to live in that house for another year, and the strange occurrences don't stop. Tom tells me he has been physically assaulted by a little kid in his bedroom. He's seen a little boy in 1800s clothing appear in a misty haze several times. All of these strange things must have really messed with Tom. He fell on hard times after he dropped out, and him and his girlfriend broke up. He also witnessed a giant triangle UFO with an entire group of people at an outdoor rave in Virginia. This, along with other pressures, seemed to have caused him to spiral emotionally. He had always been a strange guy in the most hilarious and charming way. It was really hard seeing him fall in such hard times. I just finished editing this post. I attempted to fix all typos and grammar inconsistencies, as well as adding to some details of the original post. I had been so shook up when I first typed these memories out 4 days ago that when I finished I had no desire to proofread it. So, I'm a 32-year-old man, yet it's broad daylight as I write this post, because what I'm about to share haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about it, or in this case typing this memory, is enough to send chills down my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I have only told this story to a handful of people over the past 10 years because of how terrifying an experience it was for me, but I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share it with others. Maybe others have had a similar experience. If so, please let me know. To tell the story and give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter this post is about. Buckle up. This will be a long post, but definitely not boring. My name is Joshua, but I will change the names to protect the privacy of the others involved in this story. I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to a camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, we'll call him Bob, wanted to take me and my wife around to some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150. Bob was driving a 1980 something white Celebrity. It was really a piece of crap vehicle. Anywho, it was late dusk becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car, and he took us around the area, first to an abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling around, it was a 2-hour waste of time, to be honest. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted. Again, a bust. Then an old church that was run down and supposed to be haunted. Once again, yawn. At this point, it was getting close to midnight, and my wife and I were getting pretty bored, and I spoke up to Bob saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees and daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in the picture, to which I replied no. He took the picture back and said that's because there isn't, and there are no power lines either. About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. Then after that, it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. Nothing to light the night except the full moon above head and the clear starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us all to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field, and wooden hillside was. He looked at his cell phone, which his phone and mine had no signal. This was 2003, and this area had no cell towers. But he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57, and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete dark, I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by, and nothing has changed. Then at exactly midnight, a small light flickers on in the middle of the hillside. A chill runs down my back as my wife, Bob, his girlfriend, and myself watches this small light, which to me looked like an old kerosene lantern, began to move, swaying back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, when I finally spoke up and asked what the story with this was. Bob replied he did not know, but locals had told him that at midnight every night, this lantern will light up and sway back and forth through the woods until the sun comes up and it disappears. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything could scare me or hurt me. So since there were no houses around, I yelled out, "We see you! Wow, you were so scary with your little lantern." Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth, but moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. Gliding, it began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was because within seconds we were in the car and flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent until Bob spoke up saying, "Crap, I forgot to put gas in earlier and the only store around is closed. And if we decided to go back out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning, as he only had about half a quarter tank." I said okay, and a few minutes later, we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. He told her we had brought some snacks, but she said she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, he asked if we could take my truck to the next town over to get some food because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us to that town. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would think the alternator was out. This was strange, and after the night we had, it made us all feel uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood, pulled Bob's car around to the front, and attempted to jump my truck with his car. This is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connect the jumper cables to his battery and mine, his girlfriend starts his car, and within a second the cables in between the connectors start to smoke, and in a flash of fire they burn up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob runs and turns off his car, and we take the clamps off our batteries. We look at each other in the eerie moon and starlit night. Did I mention there were no light poles around? And we both get a bad feeling at the exact same time as we suddenly realized we had been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It was a boat motor. Now, like I said, this was the time of year it was starting to get cold, especially at night. We were bundled up as it was, and we were standing still on land at night, but somebody was out on a boat after midnight with all this wind hitting them. And from the sound of the motor, it was going pretty fast, but we saw nothing. That is until the boat was about 50 yards away and a very bright spotlight comes on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I tell the women to get in his car and lock the doors. I reach into the bed of my truck and give Bob a tire pull, and I pick up another. I work at a tire shop and had all kinds of tools of the trade in my truck. We were standing in front of the vehicles in the middle. The hood's up on both as the boat pulls up to the dock, and two heavily bearded men in their 30s to 40s step out of the boat and walk up. It's hard to give an accurate description as their spotlight was still pointed at us, and it covered the men in an eerie shadow while blinding Bob and I. They look at us and at our vehicles, and one glances in the direction of the car at the women, then back at us, and lets out a huge chuckle. "You fellers got some sort of car trouble?" one asks as he lights up a cigarette. Yeah, but nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with the cigarette sniffs the air and looks down between Bob and I's feet and sees the still smoking ashes of what was the jumper cable. "Looks like it was more than your sissy jumper cables could handle. You'll need some help, I assume. We got some tools on the boat that I think I can fix you guys' problems right up." Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning says, "Fix them right up." I'm speechless at this moment, probably with my mouth hanging open. I can't remember, as the two men walk back to their boat and we hear the sounds like chains rattling around as we try to make out what they are doing, but the spotlight is so blinding we can barely see. But the chain noise was enough. Bob looked at me and without saying a word, we both jumped in his car and drove the heck out of there. For the next few hours, we drove to a populated area of houses, which wasn't many in the rural area we were pretty much stuck in, since we had very little fuel. But we all sat in the car, mostly quiet, looking around in all directions in near panic, thinking at any time those men would find us. Bob would turn his lights on every now and then and thinking he had seen some movement in the dark. After a while, the women fell asleep, and Bob and I talked about how weird this whole ordeal had been, and laughed, saying, "I told you it would be a scary night. I just didn't know it would be this sort of scary." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't even the main thing freaking me out, but the men never showed, and eventually the morning was on its way, and it was about 20 minutes until sunrise, and Bob asked if I wanted to go see if the lantern really disappears at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas, and he said yeah. The local store opens up in about an hour, so we'll be fine. I tell him in that case, okay, sure. We wake the women up and drive back to the hillside. We get there with about 4 minutes left until sunrise. We still see the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looks at me and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips, and we all watch in wonder as, right at the sunrise, the lantern slowly fades away to nothing. After this, we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling safer now. When we get there, there is no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck is still up and the doors are still locked. On a whim, I tell Bob I'm going to try to start the truck one more time before he drives us somewhere where I can get a cell signal and call for help. And I'll be damned. The truck started right up with no hesitation or problem. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigating in this area to the other people that come here, and swearing that we never wanted to come back to this area and run into the boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen in almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says he has a proposition for me. He goes on to tell me he has a group of himself and 3 other Wiccans who go out and do seances in haunted places and for their records, and that they would pay me well for my services. I'm no Wiccan, but I have always loved the paranormal. Even after what I went through at Sugarloaf, I still had an itch to scratch when it came to getting scared and dealing with the paranormal and the unknown. So I told him yes, I would love to film for them, but I had no interest in joining in, I was just okay with watching and getting to be out there looking into the paranormal again. So of course my next question was, when and where are we going to be doing this at first? When he answered me, I got a terrible gut feeling, and I wished so much that I had trusted my gut and told him I had changed my mind. Remember that lantern light out near Sugarloaf? He asked me as if there was any way I could ever forget. Yeah, I stammered. Why do you ask? I told my group this story, and they want to do the ritual there and see if we can contact a spirit and find out why it's there and what it wants, Bob replied. I don't know, man, I said. Oh, come on, Josh. Trust me, you will be safe, and I'm going to pay you $250 just to sit there and film it, he retorted. At the time, I was about to become a father, and money was tight because diapers, formula, and the like cost a small fortune. Not to mention, it was my first kid and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy spending money on not just the necessities, but also buying only top-of-the-line baby products like toys, crib, playpen, baby monitors, strollers, car seat, a combination pack and play changing table, diaper genie, and designer baby clothes. So because my wife was putting us in the poorhouse, I had to weigh out my fear of the area that he wanted to go back to and how important it was that I make all the extra money I could. So against my better judgment, I accepted the offer, and a week later, I was in the same beat-down celebrity Bob was driving 3 years before. This time with Bob and 2 guys, though, and 1 girl, that were complete strangers to me. They each were dressed very gothic and had these pentagram necklaces or something of the sort. It was 11:50 when we got there, and the 4 of them sat in a tight circle, and I was behind them to the right, about 5 feet from the barbed fence that was in front of the field that led to the hillside. And my back was to the hillside and brushes at the fence line, and I was filming my friend's circle as they all chanted something. As I have been typing this entire post, I've been getting knots in my stomach, knowing that I was coming to this part of the story. This part of the story haunts my dreams and even waking hours to this day. I'm going to do my best to describe how the following events unfolded, though I know mere words cannot do justice to the pure terror that ensued, or how horribly horrific the events sounded and were. So when reading or listening to this, turn your imagination all the way up, and believe me when I say, up to this point in my life, I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting or getting myself spooked or whatever, but after this night, I never look at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore. I show it respect and stay as far away as possible. As much as I dread it, I will now finish telling the story. As his group is chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle of them and opens some sort of book. It's not like a scary antique spellbook or anything. It looks like a newer hardcover. Anyways, He starts reciting words from it, and then he looks at his phone and tells his group to be quiet and look at the hill. I turn the camera, and at midnight on the dot, the lantern appears. One member of Bob's group blurts out, "Cool." I roll my eyes, since the way these people were dressed and the way they carried themselves, the word cool didn't seem to fit in their vocabulary. Then Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turn my back to the lights and begin to film the group as they begin again chanting, and Bob reads from the book. Then they start asking questions in hopes the spirit will respond. About this time, a wind picks up and Bob's candle goes out. He tells everyone to hold on and tells me, "Cut the camera for a minute." And I oblige and stop recording, and watch as Bob tries his lighter, then 2 lighters from his group, but none of the lighters are working. I'm sitting down watching the group when I start hearing a rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving my camera on the ground, and spin around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with their candle and lighter problem, and as I spin around, I am blinded by the brightest light I've ever seen. What I believe was the lantern up close and personal, but as quick as it appears, the light is gone, and the lantern is nowhere to be seen. If it had been the lantern that blinded me, it had moved from the hillside across the field and right behind me, and me not realizing it within the span of maybe 30 seconds. I look around for the lantern on the hillside and nothing. It's only 12:15 or so, and the light has always stayed until sunrise. At this moment, the wind quits blowing, and I hear Bob's lighter finally flick, and I see it light up, and I mutter, "Guys, did you see that?" They all turn and ask what I'm talking about, but before I can answer them, we all are stopped dead in our tracks by distant laughter coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere around us, but distant at the moment, like far off. And this is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, maybe even thousands of children that haunts me to this very moment. As I type this, I am looking around the room I'm in. Whenever I think about or talk about this experience, I can vividly remember the terrifying sound and hear it in my head. Also, it just occurred to me that if you put the letter S at the beginning of laughter, it spells slaughter. Ugh, why did I just think of that? The best way I can describe this laughter is for you to imagine listening to a large group of kids singing "Row, row, row your boat." You know how one kid will start and seconds later another will join in, starting at the beginning of the song and so on and so forth. Well, this sounded, like I said, like hundreds or thousands of children laughing, as if one would start laughing and seconds later another one would, and that pattern went on in an endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like the song "Row, row, row your boat." I'm saying they laughed in unison, just like kids do when singing that song. One would start, then seconds later another would, then another, and another, and another, and the laughter was getting louder, closer. There was sinister laughing, goofy laughing, giggling all around us, coming from all directions. I was shaking. I could not move. I was spinning around and around, looking off in the distance. This couldn't be real. This sort of thing does not happen. Like, what was happening? I scream at Bob and his group that we need to get the heck out of here, but they are already all running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candle behind, and without hesitation I run after them and jump in the car, just as the laughter is becoming deafening. We haul out of there and drive up about a mile up the road and pull over as Bob is in no condition to drive, as we're all freaking out. We all get out of the car, pacing around the car, asking each other if we really just heard what we just heard. I tell Bob that I'm sorry, but I left his camera behind. He says he does not care and that he's not going back for it. At this point, I got my hands on my knees, panting, trying to catch my breath, as I have never in my life been so terrified. This is when all of our chatter stops, as we once again hear the laughter off in the distance, very quietly at first, but slowly getting closer and closer, and louder, until once again it is becoming deafening. We jump back in the car and speed away. We drive about 6 miles, and for the first 3 miles, we can all still hear the laughter in the distance with our windows down a little. We all begin to calm a little by mile 4, when the laughter can no longer be heard, but we have no intention of pulling over again, and Bob's friend is in the passenger seat with his phone, waiting for a signal to pop up. And at about mile 6, Bob's friend says, "Hey, I got full bars." And he hands the phone to Bob, and he calls a friend of his who is into the occult and well-versed and educated in it. And as we are driving, he's describing what happened to the lady. Bob later told me his friend told him she believed it was the children of Hecate or something like that. I have no idea about what Hecate is, but it sounded like more of a guess to me. Anyways, as Bob is on the phone speeding out of the area, me and the 2 other people in the back seat all get a chill at the same time, and they told me later that, just like me, the hair on the back of their neck stood up as a loud snapping noise comes from the front end of the car, and Bob's celebrity stops dead in its tracks and will no longer move forward. He tries everything, but the car is not moving. We later discovered that a tie rod had snapped. Anyways, the friend Bob was talking to on the phone only lived about 20 minutes away from where we were, and they said they were on their way. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke, and after about 3 minutes, we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We know it was too soon to be Bob's friend, but me and Bob thought maybe we could get a ride from a local, and we all unloaded out of the car and stood in front of it, waiting on the vehicle to hopefully stop. Now, I cannot be certain, but my gut tells me I am correct. But the vehicle doesn't stop. As it comes into view, it is a beat-up old pickup truck, and it slows down. And in the truck are 2 men in their 30s to 40s with huge beards, and they stare at us and speed up after passing by. I look at Bob, and before I can speak, he says what I was already speaking. "The guy's in the boat?" Before I can say anything back, we see headlights coming from the direction the truck had passed, and we just went still and quiet as the same guys in the same truck passed by slowly again, staring at us on the side of the road. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell and get here now, and he hung up. 4 or 5 minutes go by, and we see the headlights coming. Relieved, we all get our stuff ready thinking it is Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It was the lady who was coming to get us, telling Bob that she took a wrong turn and it's going to be about 10 to 15 more minutes before she gets there. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror, as I do, as the same truck slowly passes again, this time with only one of the boatmen in the truck. This time, though, the driver slows to a crawl and says, "Looks like you fellers could use some help," and then speeds up and drives off. This cemented the fact to Bob and I that we were definitely dealing with the boat guys, but where did the other guy go? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat? And to make matters worse at this point, something we had almost completely forgot about due to the boatmen was immediately reminded to us as we begin to hear the laughter again off in the distance, but all around us like before. And over the next few minutes, it started getting closer and closer. I'm almost urinating in my pants as the sound is getting deafening, and we have nowhere to run this time. And then from behind our car, off in the distance, we see 2 sets of headlights come on and 2 vehicles coming towards us slowly, side by side, taking up the entire width of the backcountry dirt road, both coming our way. The laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road we are stuck on. The laughing seems to be zeroing in on us as if hundreds or thousands of children are within reaching distance of us. There is no wind, no sound other than the crunch of the tires on the rocky dirt road of the 2 vehicles slowly driving towards us. With our last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children, and the headlights of the 2 vehicles surely being driven by the boatmen, we are given a reprieve as, at this time, coming from the other direction, we see another set of headlights coming fast. We hold our breath. The laughter, the boatmen, what could be next? How will we get out of this? And that is when the vehicle that was coming fast pulls up, and it's Bob's friend. She unlocks the doors on her car and rolls her windows down and begins to tell us to get in. When this happens, the 2 sets of headlights coming from the other direction turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my, You weren't kidding about the laughing kids. She screams at us to get in, and we do. We begin to tell her about the boat guys, and she turns the car around, and no sooner than she starts to drive away, the two sets of headlights come on again, this time with their brights on, and they're about a car's length behind the car we are all crammed in. I yell to the driver, "Go, go, go!" Channeling my inner Jeff Goldblum, telling her faster must go faster. She floors it, and for about a mile, the two vehicles stay on us. Then they turn off onto a side road. For about the next 2 miles after that, we can all hear the laughter still way off in the distance with our windows down. Then after 3 miles, the laughter is gone. To this day, I have no explanation to what happened, what the laughing children were, why the laughing followed us, if the boatmen were connected to all this somehow, or if they were merely a coincidence that happened to terrify us at the same time as the paranormal stuff was happening. And if that is the case, why did they not react to the laughing children sound? Is the lantern connected to the laughing children? Or did Bob and his group mistakenly call forth the laughing children through their ritual? Like I said, this happened years ago, but I still feel just as terrified now when I tell people about it, or even think about it. I've had constant chills and goosebumps as I have written this. I'm sorry for typos or grammar issues, but I'm a bit shaky as well. I'm going to post the story as is. I hope it's readable, and I hope somebody who reads this and has had a similar experience can also share their story with me. In a weird way, I believe that would help me deal with the trauma this experience still causes me to this day. To all of you who think the paranormal is just a fun hobby to get your thrills with, I beg of you and I warn you that we are not prepared for what is really out there. You can think nothing will scare you or harm you, but you're dealing with unknown things. You have no idea how powerful or mundane the paranormal could be. If you use the paranormal as a thrill-seeking hobby, just use caution and always have your vehicle checked out beforehand. Oh, and watch out for seemingly sociopathic hillbillies and laughing children. Hope everyone who reads this sleeps well, but I know that after telling my story like this, that for at least the next few nights, I'll be getting no sleep at all.